My name is Dan Hennon. I live 30 minutes away from the Crowley family crime scene in Minnesota. I am the creator of the Facebook group called Justice for David Crowley and Family. I created this group on January 19, 2015, a day I'll never forget. Almost 5 years later, we have roughly 2,800 members. And my closest ally in the search for the truth is Greg Fernandez Jr. Although Greg lives in California, and like me, has no connection to this case, he has been drawn to the bizarre nature of this case. On a personal trip to California in 2016 to conduct interviews relating to the Philip Marshall family murder case in Calaveras County, I was able to meet Greg personally, as we are researchers in that case as well. I was struck by the similarities of these two horrible cases. As Greg and I are both Christians, I'm grateful that our paths crossed. We conduct faith-based research on several unsolved crimes. I consider Greg a brother and feel honored that he asked me to write the foreword to this book. As an accountant by trade, my focus is on banking transactions and anomalies that come into play relating to means, motive, and opportunity of a crime. Who benefits? Why was the crime committed? My attention to detail is something I take pride in. I'm continually amazed with Greg's tenacity to dig deeper and find the real deep details. He asks the hard questions and is persistent. Greg's attention to detail is something he's been blessed with, and is a very important skill that makes this book stand out, in my opinion. The chapters Suspicious Activity, Chapter 9, and 21 Questions for Detective Gummert, Chapter 11, are very interesting. The chapter Suspicious Activity is extremely significant, and to this day is the number one area where the law enforcement investigation fell short. The lack of follow-up on essential details was stunning. The fact that friends were in the Crowley home prior to the professional cleaning being completed is nothing short of astounding. Once the investigation ended, Greg summarized the remaining questions regarding the case that weren't answered in the police report. Greg's relationships with the lead investigator, Detective James Gummert, allowed these questions to be forwarded to the Apple Valley Police Department to be answered personally by Mr. Gummert. He took the time to answer the 21 questions, and that was appreciated by both of us. Regardless if we agree or disagree with the findings/conclusions, we were able to have a cordial, respectful dialogue with the AVPD. The Gray Stage book is a well-written, extremely well-researched book that doesn't answer the questions, but instead forces the reader to use critical thinking and challenges the reader to jump into this case with both feet. This book is more of a research tool and guide for those following the case, and leaves the conclusion up to the reader as to what may or may not have happened in the Crowley home in Apple Valley, Minnesota. Greg's straightforward approach and writing style make this a quick read, and one that could be accessed again and again during the reader's research. This is not a whodunit mystery book, but instead, it meticulously details the errors, missteps, and peculiar actions by family, friends, neighbors, law enforcement agencies, and various media outlets. Greg is careful not to point fingers, but accurately provides evidence why certain concerns are valid in a polite, respectful way. Greg has written many articles about this case, but he makes sure not to make this book a compilation of those articles. After poring over lab reports, ballistic reports, DNA analysis, and investigators' handwritten notes, Greg can pull tiny nuggets of useful information into the broader picture. Greg has appeared in numerous internet podcasts and radio shows relating to this case, and he and I are both interviewed and appear in the Netflix documentary A Gray State, produced by Eric Nelson. This book is a one-stop shop for all questions surrounding the case. The reason this case stands out is simple. It isn't a case that took place in the past, but a case that took place in real time on social media that evolved during and after the actual investigation was completed. This group uncovered Facebook posts on David Crowley's personal page that were hidden or removed after the bodies were found. We've tracked the dishonesty that family and friends were caught in the aftermath of this, and have exposed inconsistencies in witness statements provided to police. Our ongoing investigation continues to this day that involves dozens of talented citizen investigators on various media platforms that could lead one day to the actual solving of this crime. Much has been done to get this story into the hands and minds of the general public, but to date, there hasn't been traction on a case that we feel is exceedingly important. Getting a book like this published is crucial to raising the awareness of this case. Greg wants the readers to share this material and the book itself with others. This book is not intended to collect dust on your bookshelf, but instead be a resource that can be utilized, marked up, and sections highlighted to use along your journey to find justice for David Komel and Rania Crowley. The index to this book alone is 10 pages and provides the sources for each piece of information provided in the book. The title, The Gray Stage, is a well thought out name for this book. The evidence overwhelmingly shows that multiple rooms in the Crowley house were staged following this triple homicide. The living room, office, bedroom, and bathroom show that pre-planning and care was taken to confuse and throw off detectives in this case. Crime scene staging is a physical manifestation of a person's imagination for how things should appear when trying to turn a murder case into a legitimate death scene, says criminologist and death investigation consultant Laura G. Hetler, who is also vice president of the American Investigative Society of Cold Cases. Although it is not clear who committed the crimes in that home, we do know that the scene was in fact overstaged. A mistake often made by amateur criminals, and this should have been picked up by seasoned investigators. Examples include leaving the marijuana on the bedroom dresser, leaving the Quran opened up on the living room floor, writing the Islamic words in English on the wall in blood, leaving an alleged suicide note typed on a computer with no signature, playing a 53-song playlist, playing on David's laptop in a loop in the background, using hollow point bullets for a suicide, removing the dog dish water and water bowl from the home, leaving the rear slider to the patio unlocked and slightly ajar in winter, and finally, taking body parts from the scene, resulting in some to believe that the dog ate them, was all far too much for one to consider plausible. I personally believe the ugly truth will come out one day regarding what really happened to this family. And this book is a big step in that direction. I thank you for reading The Gray Stage and urge each one of you to get this book into the hands of at least one other person. Dan Hennon, October 2019. Hello and welcome. This is The Gray Stage new book written by Greg Fernandez Jr. It's a book, first of its kind, on the Crowley case in Minnesota. Today we're joined on the podcast by Stephanie, Sophia, Greg, and myself, Dan Hennon. Episode is basically going to be chapter 1. We'll go through it in sequence and see where it leads us here with information and notable items here going through this book that we'll find interesting. Stephanie, do you want to go ahead?
According to Apple Valley Police reports, the last time anyone saw David Crowley alive was on Christmas Eve of 2014. Between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m., a neighbor across the street told authorities he and David looked at each other through their window. The neighbor, Brett Millay, did not see any activity at the Crowley house afterwards. Brett was going to close the blinds on the front of his residence, Detective Tommy Booth wrote in his report. When he looked out of the front window and saw David standing in the front window of David's residence, he said that they looked at each other and then Brett closed his shade while David had turned and walked away. Mr. Millay did not notice the Christmas presents on the front steps of the Crowley home until the day the bodies were found. Millay and his wife did not socialize with the Crowley family but would exchange polite waves. A few days after speaking with Brett Millay and his wife, Officer Tara Becker reported, "I attempted contact at 1048 Ramsdale Drive to follow up with the Millays, but they were no longer at the residence."
When I was reading all of this stuff, it makes it seem like Brett lives directly across the street from David.
That's
right?
what I thought reading it, if he could see right across to the front window to see him standing there.
But it's totally off, and Brett's windows are really small, too. And this is supposed to happen between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. on Christmas Eve.
And this is Dan. This was the focus of that City Pages article, that front page of that illustration that was done, looking across in through the window, was supposed to be that Brett Millay impact. So this is a very impactful photo. This is the one that they used on the local City Pages article.
Did anybody ever get in contact with him at all after all this happened?
I talked to Brett Millay instant message a couple times, and I think I was on the phone once, but that was it. Then he didn't return any other calls after that. Yeah, he was interested in speaking, and then that was it. Then next thing I know, I tried to contact him, and it said that on Messenger, this person's no longer available.
That's weird.
So you just deleted his Facebook or blocked you right after he said he would talk?
Yeah, deleted or blocked or something, and it got back to the question that we were looking at back at the time was when the officer says that Millays were no longer at that residence, and we were wondering if they moved, if they left, what happened, and he had clarified that they put the home up for sale. It didn't sell, and they ended up taking it off the market, and they stayed there and then ended up selling it a year or two later. But the question was, after a triple homicide like this, they were quickly, we thought, did they move out that fast? And said, that wasn't the case. We had previously planned to put our house up for sale, but it was Tara Becker's statement that was strange because it said we tried to follow up that they were no longer at the residence. And then some people interpreted that they just weren't home, they were busy shopping that day, or they were out at a movie. What does that mean? They weren't at they were no longer at the residence. So I think what really drove the question was her verbiage that she used in the police report.
If they're no longer at the residence, that means they're not coming back. That's the way that I would interpret.
That's how I took it too, and a lot of people on the group says, no, they maybe, they stepped out for the night. And I said, well, she wouldn't have specifically used that phrase that they're no longer at the residence.
Right.
It also leads us to believe that the detectives never followed up saying, oh, they moved, they're gone, and we'll go on and, get key witness statements from the next neighbors. We'll skip over these guys. So it raised questions on two fronts. Why did she use the phrase, and why didn't they follow up? Even if they did move, they still should have followed up to get information about this case. And Tara Becker made it sound like we're done. We checked that off the list. We'll go on to the next neighbor. So that was very odd. And I do like the way, by the way, Greg, you started this book. Those 3 or 4 paragraphs right there are very, very, a very good introductory to bring the reader in to the story, because it's very odd. I do like that intro though.
Thank you. Because he's the last one. He's the last one that ever sees David, or that claims to have.
Does Brett Millay wear glasses at all, or does he have really good vision, or is that?
He's got a telescope. You'd need a telescope from that angle. I don't know.
Because from my house, if my neighbors are at their window, I can kind of see a shape. I wear glasses, so I can kind of see a shape if I'm in my house looking out the window. But if I'm in my driveway and they're at their window, I can actually see who it is. If he wasn't directly across the street like my neighbors are, how did he know for sure that was David?
It sounds like they connected. They either made eye contact, but they, from what Brett is saying here, according to Tommy Booth, they looked at each other.
So he must have really amazing vision if his house is not directly across the street from David, to be able to have looked at him and made eye contact and visually recognized that it was David standing there.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, how did David see him back? Because it's got to go
right. How did he know that David saw him back? Did he wave and be like "good night" or anything like that?
Well, isn't their house kitty corner anyway, towards or across from the Crowleys? I believe I have a Google Maps of that neighborhood.
Yeah, that's really the best way. We had a member, Taylor, actually was the one who sent me a video where she actually pointed that out to me, and she's like, okay, look, this is where Brett's house is. This is where David's house is. How the heck could they possibly see each other? And that was just like, I don't know.
That's what I'm thinking, because if I'm looking at my neighbor's house that's kind of kitty corner to my windows, I can't see who the person actually is, much less look at their eyes to see and recognize who they are. I can see a shadow. That's odd that he was able to. Maybe it's not odd. Maybe he's got really good eyesight to see that far. I don't know.
And it's too bad he just never clarified.
Right. That's really too bad.
I think what he
saw, that would be interesting to hear.
I think what he saw was an adult male across the in the window, and it wasn't that clear like it made it sound. So it's the whole entire comment is very suspect. I think personally, my opinion, it's kind of half right and it's kind of half wrong. It's partially right. It's not the direct view that he saw David standing there and they made eye contact. I think it was kind of kitty corner and he saw someone standing there, but it obviously wasn't a child or a woman, so he assumed it was David. I think he saw someone else though.
Well, that's so dangerous though in a case like this to assume anything.
Correct, exactly.
Assuming is what happened, that's where mistakes are made, when you assume things.
Well, that's what
I could assume that, the police department hid this and said David did it. That doesn't mean it's true.
The investigators should have drilled in farther onto that question with Brett Millay to say, did you see a figure of a man or did you see David? And If you saw David, how would
Right.
you know that? You know, if you were to get him on, if this was a court case and you get Brett Millay on the stand, the defense would rip him apart because how could he safely conclude that it was David Crowley? Because there's so much.
Right. They would look at how far away the houses are and what his vision is like. They would be like, well, listen, you know, if I was standing at my neighbor's house, I couldn't see exactly who it was unless all the lights were on. And, you know, I've got 20/20 vision, if not better than that.
Yeah, so that
It
one
reminds me of my cousin Vinny. That part in My Cousin Vinny where the neighbor is supposedly looking out her window while making grits or something like that and could see the getaway vehicle, but then it turned out that they were basically blind and making the story up. I'm sorry. It just reminds me
There's
of that.
hundreds of neighbors around like serious crimes that, you know, they'll call and report that they saw something just to get some kind of attention. You know, it doesn't mean that they actually saw that, which is why the police are supposed to do follow-up to make sure that what is being said is the truth. That's their job. That's what I think of when I picture what an investigation is, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so how come there's like this? This is where one of the dots stops. It doesn't connect to anything else because they didn't follow up with him. He just moved. Did they never want to find out for sure if it was David they saw, to find out, like, you know, a 100% sure date of death or something like that?
That would make sense because, I mean, why would Tara Becker even follow up? What was she attempting to make contact? What was the reason she wanted to make contact with Brett?
Right.
There was a reason, and then because they're no longer there, so maybe the reason wasn't that important to where she felt she didn't need to follow up. But there was a reason why Tara Becker wanted to talk with Brett, and I think it really is what Dan's talking about. They wanted to probably see, how does this guy know that who he said was David? Did he see David like this? Did him and David make eye contact like this other times? Would he know because he's seen David walk through his house so many times that, okay, it had to be David, I can tell David's walk, or something like that. I don't know. But that's what kind of made this really stand out to me.
Because, like, you can look at a blind person and make eye contact, but that doesn't mean they're seeing you. You're seeing them, but that doesn't mean they're seeing you.
Right.
You can see somebody you recognize in a passing car, but that doesn't mean they saw you. If you look at them and see their eyes, ask them about it later. It's very possible that they didn't see you, even though you saw them see you.
Greg, the other notable thing in this first few paragraphs is Brett Millay's allegedly great eyesight here. It did not, over 3 weeks, notice any gifts on the front steps, which police say that they were there for 3 weeks. We've now, for the most part, come to the conclusion that those gifts were probably there just for 1 week, planted around the 10th or the 11th. That's just my opinion, and that would make it reasonable for Brett Millay to miss those gifts on that front stoop for up to a week. I think that's reasonable. Highly unlikely if they were sitting there for 3 weeks with that great window shot and his great vision that he wouldn't have seen the gifts. So that's another very important piece of this, that the neighbor with the great eyesight did not see any gifts at all on the front stoop.
Right, but they were supposedly there for 3 weeks.
Yeah, so that important. Those first 4 sections, paragraphs of the very first chapter, there's already 2 good nuggets in there already. And that, like Greg, what you said is Tara Becker may have honestly wanted to go back with her, wearing her detective cap. I'm going to go back and do a follow-up. And once she got back and says that they weren't there, it could have been, allegedly, I'll say, that the higher-ups in the police department said, you know what, let that go, let's move on to something else. If it was some part of the setup to make this case go away, maybe she did want to pursue it. no one was there, it would have been certainly something her higher-ups would have said, nope, focus on the next thing, let's move on, we don't have time for this. And that's how these things get successfully covered up on things like that. Because Tara Becker certainly would not go back and say, oh, no, I don't think so, I am going to go back. Because that's that chain of command again that's much like the military. You do what you're told and you don't question it. So that's all I can say.
So if she, for instance, had the thought of, well, how does he know for sure that that was David there? Let's go and find out. And she went to, you know, whoever is her boss and said, hey, I'm going to try and find these people. I haven't been able to locate them because, you know, it seems they've moved. You know, they're not there. Can I go do this? And the higher-up could have possibly said, listen, we already know it's a murder-suicide. Don't even try and track that down. Don't waste time.
Yeah, whether intentional or not, I believe that was probably what would happen in this case. You know, we got other fish to fry. Let's move on. But if it was part of the cover-up, the post-cover-up, that would certainly be the case to not be digging in to anything further. And then Tara Becker was the unwitting victim in that case, and probably she did have good, well-meaning intentions to do her detective work, but was told not to. But you're right, Greg had the best point there. There was a reason she wanted to go back to that home and do a follow-up of some sort. This wasn't something that she just wanted to bop in and follow up. She made a point to follow up. And then for some reason, it just ended. There was no follow-up, and there never was any follow-up. That's the thing that concerns us as investigators looking into this. Why not the secondary follow-up? Why didn't that ever come to fruition? Why did that never did happen? And there's your answer. It was probably told by some higher-up not to do it. Don't waste your time, and let's move on to something else. That's probably how these chips started to fall into place. All right, this stands in a good spot. All right, Officer Tara Becker. Once again, we're just talking about Tara Becker, but Officer Tara Becker also spoke with the neighbors who lived directly across the street from the Crowley family, William and Anne Marie Hickson. Mrs. Hickson didn't know their names, Officer Becker reported. She only indicated that a white male lived there and that he appeared to be a good father to their little girl, who was approximately 5 years old. Mrs. Hickson also saw a light or candle come on inside the Crowley house every day since Christmas, according to Officer Becker's report. Teresa Shepard lived behind David Crowley on Lowell Drive. According to her interview with Detective Brian Bone, Shepard was out of town until December 23rd, 2014. Unlike Mrs. Hickson, Shepard did not see any lights on at the Crowley home and wondered if they were on vacation. Shortly after Shepard arrived home, Detective Bone reported she noticed that the rear sliding patio door was standing partially open. She said from her vantage point, she could not say if this was the patio door or the screen door that was standing open, but she could see a door was ajar at the rear patio door area. Shepard did not hear or see anything else unusual at the Crowley residence. At the end of his report, Detective Bone noted, quote, Shepard did not call the police about the door that she had seen ajar.
You have this other neighbor who sees this light or this candle, but Brett doesn't talk about a light or a candle or anything like that. So maybe that was another reason why Tara Becker wanted to follow up, because maybe to ask about this light. What is this light? Because what lights were on there? What lights were on in this house? Just the one kitchen light.
That's what I was wondering, is what light she could have been talking about. Because if it was a candle or a light, would she have been able to see it on during the day if it was just left on?
I agree.
Did we notice anything in the crime scene photos that would have been on a timer?
That's
I
also,
didn't. Yeah, that was one of that was one of the good theories. Was that maybe there was some timer? Maybe those Christmas lights that
Or on a
we see
timer.
strung behind the back. Maybe they were on some type of a timer. That would
And I
make
also
sense.
have an issue with the whole door being ajar because it was slightly cracked open, a fourth of an inch, supposedly from what the police reports say. How would she be able to see that from her window?
Well,
Well,
now we're
Unless it was,
That's Shepard.
that's a different person. That's Teresa Shepard, who lived behind David.
My thing with this is, Detective Bone noted Shepard did not call the police about the door she had seen ajar. If she didn't know anything was going on over there, why would she be suspicious that their door's open?
So here's what
You
I
know?
think.
If she didn't hear anything and there was no, like, serious signs that something was wrong over there, why would she call the police when her neighbors had their door open? That'd be like calling the police on your neighbor for their car not being in their driveway.
Yeah, these are some good points. I'm going to circle back and finish up with the Hickson item, and I don't know, Greg, if you have anything more with Hickson either. But here's what I see in the Hickson. One is important for what we see in the notes, and the other thing that's even probably more important is what isn't mentioned from Miss Hickson. Number one, what isn't mentioned. Her view is directly across the street. It leads us to believe it's actually a better view than Brett Millay. Hickson doesn't mention anything about gifts for 3 weeks being on the front stoop. I think that's the big thing that's missing from Hickson. And then the other thing she says is that light or the candle, and I agree with Stephanie, it could have been something that's on all day long. She just wouldn't have seen it during the day because the sun is out. And she would have seen it, of course, every night when the sun goes down. That could be easily explained away as something on a timer as well. So I don't know what that relates to. Hickson's account really doesn't give us anything. Now the Shepard, if we can move on to the Shepard, the house behind, I think this is where we get some good information. We get the first instance of a sliding door that's ajar on the patio. Now when we know that the officers first appeared on the scene, the back rear slider was slightly ajar. We're talking a quarter of an inch, something very, very small. Shepard's account says that the door, whether it was the glass patio door or the screen door, one of those or both of those was open from her house, which means it was a lot larger than a quarter of an inch. She wouldn't have taken note of something being just open a quarter inch. I'm thinking this was 6-7 inches open or something, would have been noticeable from the neighbor's house. That's pretty
Right. It would have had to been open at least enough for somebody to fit through it or an animal to fit through it for her to be able to see it from her house.
Yep, and she didn't notice anything unusual, and she didn't call, and that would make sense. I don't think I would call if I saw a neighbor's door open a few inches or something either. So, but
right, like if it was a couple days open, she probably would have thought it was weird.
Yes.
But if it was just open one day and then closed the next, she wouldn't have thought it was weird, which is why she wouldn't have called the police.
Yeah, they hadn't been there.
And she had been on vacation, out of town. She got back and then saw it open. So the question is, if this was the 23rd, out of town until the 23rd, and then shortly after she arrived home, that door was open at one point. So then the question is, was it when the Crowleys were still alive, or was it after that someone was opening and closing that door? So the timing here hurts us because we can't narrow down. But I do think it's safe to conclude that it wasn't open just a quarter of an inch, enough for her to notice that it was open, which means, and this is January, or this is December once again, winter in Minnesota, regardless if it's December or January, your patio doors are not open at all.
I yell at everybody who leaves the door open in my house. That's heat getting out. So I don't know why anybody, even if it's not like down below freezing, if it is still like a spring warm day in January, I'm still not leaving my doors open. They had a dog. I have cats. So, I mean, not only that, but again, that's heat leaving the house. So, I mean, you might leave it open for a couple of seconds, but then you're going to close it. If somebody was going in and out of there, they would have closed it, not closed it all the way. And wasn't it broken or something, like the latch on it?
It's not in police reports. I think that would have been mentioned if it was.
It's only been mentioned by the friends saying that it was broken, and everybody who knew David and Kamel knew that the back door was broken.
I think that's quite interesting that it's not mentioned that it's broken in the police reports, but all of the friends say it was common knowledge.
Yeah.
If it was broken, that would have that would have forced them to look at signs of somebody breaking into the house, right? Forced entry.
And they make very, very sure to put in here that there are no signs of forced entry. They made it a very big point. Yeah. They didn't, beat around the bush about that. We didn't see this, broken. This didn't seem messed up. No, they make it a very solid point. No forced entry was observed.
So if they can do that, forced entry.
Right. So the door was open. So why would you need to have any forced entry? You're not going to need to bust open the front door if the back slider doesn't lock, and you know that. I had a sliding door several years ago, and I put a bar because the lock it didn't always catch. It didn't always go down. It was old. So I would put like a curtain rod in there, like in the track of it. So even if, you pulled the door, it would only open like a quarter of an inch.
Well, so, David built his own bathroom. He built a lot of stuff. Are you telling me he didn't know how to fix a broken rear slider? I'm just not buying that either.
That's
especially
a good point too.
With the child in the house and it's winter. No, that doesn't make sense. But I don't see any proof that it was broken either. So, and I think if it was, I think they would have said so. Anything else on Shepard? It's also kind of weird how Shepard, she doesn't see any activity in the house from December 23rd. Once she gets back, were they already dead? I guess that's when I read her statement. That was my first thought was, well, maybe they were already dead. But then you see Brett, who sees David on the following day. So, but then like Christmas, nobody.
That's what leads into the theory that they were taken out of the house or they were being tortured, because none of the neighbors noted any activity at weird random times that don't match up with how long the bodies had been decomposed for.
Right. Nobody's saying, okay, we know, this is when we last were, the family was gone from this time. Everybody just thought that they were gone. For Christmas, what was the date that everybody was last seen? It was December 19th when they picked up their daughter, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much
from the school.
Yeah, from the school. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself with that there, but anything else on Shepard?
Just to clarify that Shepard didn't see anything unusual at the house. It doesn't say that she didn't see any activity at the house. She just said unusual. So that could be taken a variety of ways. And because they're behind the house, Shepard seeing the gifts would not come into play here.
I see.
Right. She wouldn't see the front of their house unless she was driving by over there.
That'll tie in, I guess, with what one of the other neighbors behind their house sees, too. So, okay, I'll go next for Larry and Lorraine Tuppy. Larry and Lorraine Tuppy lived one house east of the Crowley family on Ramsdale Drive. Officer Tara Becker spoke with Lorraine Tuppy the day the bodies were found. Her husband was at their cabinet up north, and Mrs. Tuppy didn't see the Crowley family in over 3 weeks. did not know the family very well, and couldn't remember the name of David's wife. And Mr. Tuppy conversed with David more than Mrs. Tuppy did. According to Officer Becker, David Crowley told Mr. Tuppy about a screenplay he sold. Tuppy stated that she knew David to be somewhat of an artist, wrote Becker, in that he was doing some work with screenplays and films, and had told her husband that he had sold a screenplay and was working with some lawyers, and that it had something to do with guns and gun control and or possibly the gun industry. Directly behind David's house on Lowell Drive lived a father and daughter. Both spoke with Detective Michael Tietz and Detective Sean McKnight. According to Detective Tietz, Mark Torkelson and his daughter said the Crowley home had been dark since Christmas and that they hadn't seen any occupants in a long time. The daughter said her room was on the back of the house and that lights on the back of the neighbor's house would shine into her room if they were on. This female stated she hadn't seen anyone at the Crowley residence since the weekend before Christmas school break, which started 12/19/14. Also, the daughter told the detective she never heard David and Kamel fight. At some point, the female was going to babysit for Rania, but thought David was against the idea.
Did anybody ever find out why she thought David was against the idea? Was that followed up on?
No. No. Never followed up on.
So why are all these neighbors' accounts not matching up? Like, they say the lights were off, and the other neighbor said she saw either a light or a candle.
This daughter says that she would see any activity if there was any activity in that house, if there were any lights on. So the other neighbor, going back to Shepherd, and she doesn't see any lights on.
Right.
At the same times. So you have some people seeing lights on, other people not seeing lights on. And it can drive me crazy sometimes thinking about that. When was the last time these people saw them? Go ahead, Sophia.
Would it make a difference whether it was the people in front of the Crowley house that were seeing lights versus the people behind the Crowley house?
Well, I think that the people who lived in front of the Crowley house should have the same story, and the people that lived in the back of the house should have the same story, in which the facts should meet up on whether or not the lights were on.
Shepherd didn't see any lights. Neither did the other neighbors behind. They didn't see any lights. So it was only one person who saw lights, and they were at the front.
People in the back aren't seeing lights. People in the front
Right.
are.
Mhm.
Got it.
I wonder if it could have been a flashlight.
That's just on?
I don't know. It's just weird. Unless there was something that had been on a timer.
If you go with the theory that they were out of that house, it is possible that whoever committed this, if it wasn't David, that they were in there staging things, like the blood on the wall, and I don't know, who knows what all they did, who knows what all, maybe they're the ones who neatly put everything back on those shelves, who knows.
But this is a small town, and if you're going to put a body back, to move a body back into that house and then to stage, they would still have to stage a lot of different things.
But at night, if you think about it, at night, if you knew the yard you were walking through with, like, the back of your hand, you could walk through it in the dark, right?
Right.
And then over a 3-week period, those footprints of somebody walking through the backyard would have disappeared if it snowed or the wind blew or it rained or anything. So theoretically, you could, under the cover of darkness, get into the back of this house without neighbors noticing you, put the bodies there. Before you put the bodies there, go in there and, like, stage things, and maybe that's the light that they saw, and then, go and draw open the blinds and call Dan up and say, hey, come on, let's put those presents there. Nobody's found them yet. Or however it was done, because this is theoretical. We can't find the proof yet. We're trying. That's the whole point. You could almost write a whole book of just questions on this.
You'd go crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you could. 500 pages of 500 questions. Question each page.
Just on questions while you're reading this. Start at the front of a notebook and don't stop till you get to the end of this book. I mean, just
Take notes.
questions, not facts, not anything. Just questions you come up with. They'll add up. And I bet you'd have more questions than any of these detectives asked, or at least that we're seeing the proof that they asked.
The other thing with the Tupis family, there's one thing that's interesting once again, and one thing that's interesting that's not mentioned again. They're the next door neighbors. Neither the husband or the wife have seen gifts at all. Not mentioned. And the husband, Larry, makes a very fine observation here, which turns out, after the information that we know now is true, the very fine information says that David Crowley sold a screenplay. We know that now to be fact. He did. And he also said that he was working with some lawyers on a film that he was working on, also a fact. And had something to do with guns or gun control, also, for the most part, fact. So, Mr. Larry, kudos to him, 100% spot on. So David was telling him honest-to-goodness things that was going on that even the Gray State Project guys weren't even aware of, that he had sold the script and was working with lawyers and moving forward with a contract. That's huge.
How was this how did it get brought up? Like, between him and David is what I would ask.
Don't
like
know,
that's not something that, if you've got a relationship with a neighbor where you just wave, that you'd be telling them, yeah, I'm
Correct.
working with lawyers and I sold a screenplay. If it's just a neighbor that you don't really know any personal information about, why would you give that much personal information?
I don't know why, but the fact of the matter is that he did. So
Right.
that's all we need to look at, I think.
Yep.
That's,
He did.
And it shows right there that, he wasn't, at least to me, that statement said he wasn't, down in the dumps and ready to just, blow everybody away.
Right.
And he didn't walk away either.
Right. He didn't walk away either, like he told his father, supposedly, in the text messages.
That's a great point, too.
and then I think with the other house, I think the daughter about the babysitting.
Yeah.
I don't think I see a daughter that age telling police, you know what, I think we weren't going to do babysitting because I think David was against the idea. That, in my personal opinion, I think was a planted narrative seed added to the police report after the interview was done.
I was wondering
the daughter
if they
saying,
maybe...
I don't want to babysit, or they didn't want me to babysit, or they never followed up with me potentially babysitting in the future. But I have a hard time thinking that she said to police that David was against the idea. I think that was edited in later as part of the cover-up, because once again, it's planting that seed that he is the bad guy.
Right.
Okay, but do you think that they could have phrased that question to her to kind of create that, to get
Yes.
that response?
Like leading? Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
And
And do we know how old she is?
She was underage. She was actually taken out of the 94 pages, and I did not put her name in this book. But it is out there. But I think she was 16 or 15 at the time.
She wouldn't have voluntarily opted that up of, I never babysat because David didn't want me to. She wouldn't have opted that up. Have you tried getting information like that out of any girl under the age of 18?
Well, they're all different, so you never know.
They are, but they don't readily just, you've got to ask them questions certain ways to get the information you want out of them. Because otherwise, they give you base answers Fine. Okay. Yes. No.
Yeah, maybe they weren't getting the answers that they wanted when she's saying, the house has been dark since Christmas. I don't know. I mean, I guess that's actually an answer that they would want. So,
they could have said, like, if she said, well, I was supposed to babysit one time, but it fell through, they could have said, well, why do you think it fell through? Do you think, like, it was something against you, or, like, what was the situation? Plans changed or whatever. That way that idea is there for her to say, well, I think maybe it was more of a David didn't want me to, so it just never happened. That could have happened.
Yeah, her big statement for me is when she says that she hasn't seen anybody in the house since December 19th, which is the same day that anybody has ever seen David, or any of them.
Yeah.
It's an interesting date. So I don't know. I never thought about the fact they could be leading.
And is she the only one who said that?
Yeah. But even to babysit, even for it to be a consideration, wouldn't you think there is a relationship there, right? I mean, somewhat of a good one to even think, oh, well, maybe we could have this person do it. Or do you think
I've never asked my neighbors to babysit my kids. I always ask somebody I know, like, intimately, that they're a good kid.
Yeah.
And we don't have teenagers babysit our toddler. It's adults that babysit.
Where I live, you can actually go and take classes and get certified, like in CPR and whatnot. To be, you've got to be at least 14, but you can actually legally be a babysitter with that card.
But I can tell you right now, we won't allow anybody under the age of 18 to watch our 3-year-old.
Oh, I don't blame you there.
Yeah.
I'm very leery about leaving anybody with my kids because they're monsters.
But how about a 5-year-old? Not a 5-year-old?
No, not even a 5-year-old.
No.
I wouldn't. My 5-year-old, I would not leave with my next-door neighbor's kid. I wouldn't do it if I didn't know them intimately, if we hadn't, like, been around them to see that they're a good influence to be around a 5-year-old.
Well, let's see, unless you have anything else on this
I've got one last comment, Greg. A comment, and the ladies can maybe help me out on this one. The babysitter girl, this is the young girl now, said that she doesn't remember seeing anyone at the Crowley house since, quote, the weekend before Christmas school break. She was interviewed here probably January 19th, I'm guessing, 18th. Haven't seen him since December 19th. That's a month. I think if you were a teenage girl, when's the last time you saw someone at the neighbor's house, I think the answer would be, I haven't seen someone over there in a week or two. Heck, maybe it was 3 weeks. But to say, since the weekend before Christmas break, that seems to be either something that's
quite specific,
once again, to plant that seed, that I don't see a teenage girl saying, since the weekend before Christmas break, the 19th of December. That's something that happened a month ago, and a teenage, they probably, they're not thinking too much, probably forgot what they did the week before at that age. Boys and girls. Unless something
specifically, like, important to that girl happened around the time that she last noticed anything at the Crowley residence,
and
I do not believe that in a month's time she would be able to recall, and that's just based on her age. I don't know her. I don't know if she's like an exceptionally smart kid who's got a photographic memory. We don't know. But for her to be that young, if she had imprinted in her mind that the week before Christmas school break, she had to have had something significant happen within the few minutes of time that she had seen whatever activity at the Crowley house to remember that date specifically.
Yeah, and that would also be in the police report. My cat died that day. That was why I remembered it. There's an accident.
Right, that should have been in there.
Well,
something,
couldn't
and
it-
nothing else was in there, so it seems to me that it's just inserted in there for God knows why, what reason. But I just saw that. That struck me as odd. That's all.
Yeah, I agree on that one.
Me too.
Yeah.
To be that specific.
I kind of think because it's Christmas school break, that's a big deal, right? I mean, you would kind of know.
Not
It's kind of like
really.
a marker. You're like, hey, I'm out for 2 weeks now. Of course, that's
Not
one of the
really.
days I would remember. No, I always look forward to
No.
that. It was always a Friday.
Well,
This was a Friday.
I agree. She would look forward to it. The teenage daughter would.
Yeah.
But would that tie directly into when she last saw some activity in the neighbor's home in the backyard?
Oh, I see.
Right.
I'm just saying from that it doesn't correlate. What's the correlation there?
If somebody was to ask you, Greg, where were you April 7th, 1997?
Right.
Would you
but-
remember?
No.
Like right off the top of your
No.
Nobody
But that
would.
part-
They'd have
but
to
that part
sit and
here-
think about it.
Correct.
So
but that
think
part,
about a month ago.
Right. But
A
this,
month
but
ago
this
from
date,
today.
Okay, but first of all, this date that was added, I think you guys are right. I think some of this is kind of creative
Like it was
writing.
put in there to
Creative
kind of
writing, yeah.
build up.
Yeah, because I think they put in this date, and they put in the date wrong. They put 12/19/15. I'm the one who, in this book, put the correct date, so they didn't get it right. They didn't have the year right. So, yeah, I don't know. That's all I'll say on
So
that.
they did that often throughout the reports, because you'll notice that on the search warrants too, that the date and year is wrong.
I really was hoping we could just chalk that one up to the fact that it was a new year. But the more you look at how many times they got it wrong, you really have to wonder if it is in fact just a coincidence.
I think the thing to consider, in going through this book that Greg wrote is the creative writing in all these lines here, because we do know to some extent the Apple Valley Police Department at some level was involved in this cover up. Was it right away though, or was it after? And so I think when Tara Becker and Detective Teets went door to door and started doing these witness interviews and talking, it probably started off very innocently enough, and they were asking honest questions. But when it came time to write the report, by this time we're starting to see potentially some of these creative phrases being fluffed up in the police report. And so that's what I'm talking about here. I don't know if they were having necessarily leading questions for this babysitter to get certain answers out, and that would be good, because that would be placing these detectives on the street here, the guys, the low-level guys, involved in the cover-up. And a lot of times with those types of things, they are not at that level. Only the higher-ups are involved in the cover-up. The lower-level workers are just the puppets doing what they're told. They don't need to be involved in the cover-up, because when they go to write the reports later, these can always be edited and changed to however they seem fit. So that's just my opinion once again, but we do know that they were involved somehow in the cover-up because of the files that we received, the pictures, the various things that are not correct, the photographs, and we'll get into all that later. But we do know that they were involved at some point. All right. That's
Well,
all
not only that, but the moving and manipulating of the skull piece too, while right there, while at the crime scene, they're doing it. I think it was
possible. Sorry.
No, I just think that the cover-up started almost immediately.
And
is it possible that Wish, as new to this as she was, she just really wanted to find something going door to door, so maybe she put an actual date in there just to have that information? I mean, it's plausible. It's possible. I mean, I don't want to ever accuse somebody of that, but, being so new, I mean, I've been pulled over, and given tickets by really young cops that they're just graduated. This is like their first ride along where somebody gets pulled over and they just want to find something, so they're jerks. They want to find something, so they're trying to make something appear, And it's not really that they're purposely trying to mess up an investigation. It's that they want some sort of recognition as them having a part in a big case, if it was to go there. Is that like not online with this woman, or is it known, or?
Speculation, I think, right? So I don't know.
I mean, that was just my question, my thought.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea. I definitely wouldn't want to ruin this woman's reputation by saying that, because I don't know.
Right. And that's why I try to stay away from the speculation, all that stuff, as much as possible. But you can't help it, and there's nothing wrong with playing these scenarios out and thinking about this stuff. I think it's sometimes people will just kind of hook onto one theory or hook onto one thing, and kind of they won't let go to it. In this case, that's really hard. If you're going to do that in this case, it's going to be really hard to really grasp all of these different things that are happening, all these spider webs that are just kind of leading into different areas. And it's very easy to just kind of get lost in this case, and then just, give up.
There are a lot of cases where they end up finding that it was a staged scene because one detective didn't like what everybody else thought. So who's to say in this case all these cops didn't just say, "Oh, you think it's that? What about you? You think it's murder suicide? All right, yeah, let's go with that."
Right. Yeah, and that's why we want to keep those doors open, because we don't know. We don't know if there are people out there in law enforcement that are trying to help us. We don't know if there are, people out there in law enforcement that are trying to help us or trying to do the right thing in this case, which is just to help us get the case reopened, to figure out a lot of these unanswered questions. And the biggest question is, what proves David Crowley guilty? And I think if we ever get to that point, we'll get our answer. So, Sophia, if you want to at least read the next 3 paragraphs, that would be great.
Alan and Gina Olson also lived behind the Crowley residence on Lowell Drive. Detective Brian Bone first spoke with Gina Olson, who mentioned her husband heard 3 rapid-fired shots from somewhere outside of their residence. A day later, Detective Bone followed up with Alan Olson to learn more about the gunshots he heard before December 31st, 2014. Mr. Olson stated he was sitting in his living room one evening with his daughter when he heard 3 rapid-fired gunshots somewhere outside of his house. Olson could not remember exactly where the sounds came from, but he was certain he heard gunshots. Olson told Detective Bone that he and his family were home between 1 p.m. on Christmas Eve and 1 p.m. on Christmas Day. However, Mr. Olson was unsure if he heard the gunshots on either of those days. Detective Bone's report ended by stating Alan explained that he had not called the police because he did not have any specific information about when he had heard the shots. Colin and Judy Prochnow lived one house west of David Crowley on Ramsdale Drive. Colin Prochnow reportedly heard gunshots sometime between December 2nd and December 19th, 2014. Mr. Prochnow was able to narrow down the date to December 9th or December 10th, sometime between 1 p.m. and 2 a.m. most likely. Mr. Prochnow also believed the gunshots came from the direction of the Crowley residence. Colin did not contact law enforcement, Officer Tara Becker reported, but stated that he checked out his front door and didn't see anything, and checked out of the back of his residence and thought it was fireworks. The Prochnows believed they last saw the Crowleys just before Christmas. Officer John Broughton wrote this in his report. According to Joe Cooksley's notes, written on January 17, 2015, Colin Prochnow blew out the driveway on December 25, 2014.
I can start this one off with the Olsons. This is Alan and Gina, lives behind the house. And I think the thing here to note is that this individual, Alan Olson, heard 3 rapid-fire shots, later says that they were gunshots. Couldn't exactly remember where they came from, but he was certain they were gunshots. I think that's huge because someone who's used to being around weapons or guns or hunting, which I don't know about this Mr. Olson, but because he used the phrase certainly were gunshots, leads me to believe he wasn't guessing. He knows the sound. An average person would think that these were fireworks or something going off. And
a car backfiring.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So he knew it, and they were rapid fire. So that is probably legit. Now, he doesn't know the dates, though, and it just says they're before December 31st. So that is, I think that's relevant. That's valid data, regardless, if it relates to the Crowley killings or not, we don't know, but that's something huge. Now, the fact that he didn't call police, I think in that case, he thought that if he would call police, they would say, where were the shots coming from? What, all these questions, and he thought, well, I don't know the answer to those, so I'm not going to call them. The difference with that is you would still potentially call police to report suspicious activity, gunshots going off, even if you can't locate what direction or any, answer any other questions to it. At least you could have something on record with police that gunshots were fired or heard in that neighborhood on that specific date. That would have been helpful if he would have called, even if he had no answers, just to get it on the record books that there was suspicious activity in the house. Now later, when the friends were over on January 19th, after the bodies were there, another neighbor did call and say, there's suspicious activity in that house. That person did not give any other specifics, just simply said, can you please respond to some suspicious activity. So the Alan Olson case here would have been very helpful if he did call to report gunshots. Obviously that's where they were. He also says that they were home between Christmas Day and Christmas Eve. I don't think that's got anything to do with anything, because these gunshots were heard toward the end of the year, later in the week, by the 31st. So I don't know what that is, but I can vouch. I think that's legitimate. What he heard was legitimate because he said he was certain that they were indeed gunshots.
Wasn't there 3 bullets that had Kamel's
Yes.
That
were all found right there on the carpet.
Mm-hmm.
But then we also have the bullet in the basement, Ronnie's bullet, another bullet laying on the carpet. It was a whole bullet with the casing. It was an unfired one. A bullet fragment. So, there was a lot more than just 3.
Correct. And the point with this for Olson is, even though he's got it correct, if this does lead to 2 separate shootings, if this does relate to any involvement with the Crowleys, we know that at least 5 shots were fired, and so shootings took place at 2 different times. That would lead us to suspect, which doesn't really jive with the official story of everyone being shot once in a simple double homicide murder, or double homicide suicide, with 3 nice
right, because
shots
who's
fired.
to say that the first neighbor that heard the 3 rapid fire shots, maybe he heard, the first set, and then the next neighbor later on heard the shots for, whoever, or the shot into the ceiling or the basement, or...
Because you have 5 shots at least, right?
Yeah, you'd have 2 separate incidences of shots fired, and that doesn't really jive. So I think this story, which is very important, I think it's kind of dies off in the police report, because they don't They don't do anything more with it. But that's huge.
Correct.
If there were 2 separate shootings. Now, we also know the bodies were not there for 3 weeks, probably because of the decomposition of the bodies. And if someone was shot earlier, for instance, Pomel, she would have a different rate of the decomposition if she was shot around that time. So it certainly could be the case. It certainly could mean nothing. But I think it's relevant because of the time.
Right.
And Colin's story doesn't line up with activity that has been on the bank account, Kamel's phone records, the school seeing David and Kamel picking up Ronnie on the 19th. So all of his story doesn't line up with the evidence that we actually have. So
and the only thing I can say with the Colin Prochnow thing is he heard shots. It looks like he's trying to decipher when he heard the shots, but when you finish reading his story, all of it is irrelevant.
Yeah,
I think between the 2nd and the 19th, and there was no shootings between the 2nd and the 19th that related to the Crowleys, so that's not pertinent at all. And then he's got it narrowed down to the 9th or the 10th, and he thinks it's between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. That's got nothing also to do with anything. And he also did not contact law enforcement, so a lot of that is just fluff, 2 paragraphs that really means nothing. It has nothing of value, and he thought it was fireworks. Well, that's probably true. Now he goes on to say,
sorry.
Go ahead.
If Colin didn't know like what a gunshot sounded like, he could have related it to fireworks.
Correct. Most people would think that's what they actually think they are when they hear gunshots later, for instance, a mass shooting or something. They'll say, "I thought it was fireworks." So that's a normal response. Now he goes on to say that the last time he saw them was, quote, just before Christmas. So once again we get this 3-week narrative that the family was missing from all the neighbors all nicely lining up the last time we saw them. So I think that's goofy or strange. And then he goes on to say that he blew out the driveway on the 25th, which I think we can conclude that is not a factual statement.
I was kind of bothered by that because my neighbors don't shovel for me. I've offered to shovel for my neighbors, and they give me dirty looks and tell me, "No, I got it, thanks," in like a really terse tone. So if he is the type of neighbor that does that, I mean, more power to him if that's what he did. That's really nice. But I don't know a whole lot of people like that.
Stephanie, are you in California? Where are you located?
I am in Western New York.
Okay.
We've been having a lot of snow, and we have a plow that goes by on the streets and on the sidewalks, and everybody just pretty much does their own sidewalk and driveway.
So there's a lot of folks following this case from other countries and also from the South here in the U.S. And we've had to go over this a couple times just to get the verbiage here as far as what it's like in winter in Minnesota. One is you use the phrase shoveling, and that is certainly something that we do here. That's something that happens with maybe less than an inch of snow, maybe an inch or 2 inches of snow, is shoveling the driveway, shoveling the sidewalk, those types of things. You don't get your snow blower or your snow thrower out unless there's 2 or 3 or 5 inches of snow from the night before. So,
right.
And if you're going to snow blow,
if you have a snow blower,
you're going to get the shovel out. And if you're going to shovel, you're not going to get the snow thrower out. You're going to use one or the other. Now, the records of the history in Apple Valley for those 3-week period of the weather forecast, the precipitation shows that there were some days that there was flurries and a light coating of snow that came down. Other days there was some rain, but there was no plowable snow in that 3-week period in the state of Minnesota at all.
So then why was he blowing the driveway at all?
He wasn't. So the question is, why did he insert that comment? Now, one thing he Now, Stephanie, you made a good, a relevant point that others, I think, take note here. Even when you don't get a lot of snow, when the snow plows go through on the streets, it does pile up on the end of your driveway. That you may not have to use the snow blower to get the driveway clean, but at the end of it, there might be 5 or 6 inches of snow that you cannot do with just a simple shovel. So you do need to blow out the end of the driveway. Now, Colin Prochnow perhaps did that. If there was some substantial snow in Apple Valley, Minnesota, that would have meant just doing the end of the driveway, where the snow piles up. Sounds like,
but if there wasn't any significant snowfall or rain, that you said there was rain even during that time.
There was rain.
You wouldn't really.
There was 8/100ths of an inch of rain and 3/100ths of an inch of snow, and one other time there was 1/100th of an inch of snow. So there was none of those.
So why was he? There's no way he would be blowing anything.
Correct.
Is he blowing water around?
So Colin Prochnow did not blow anyone's driveway out on any of those dates. So the question is, why was that inserted into the police report? I think it's to make him look like a nice, concerning neighbor, and it's that whole good feel.
So a connection, so that his whole side of it would have more validity to it.
Validity, that they were the caring neighbors. They were watching the house. They were making sure they were gone. Possibly.
This is how we know they're very credible. They talked. He blew out their driveway for them.
It's another way to insert credibility into the people. The same way as the babysitter did discredit to David by saying, David and Kamel didn't want me to babysit because I think David didn't want it to happen. It's how it's crafted. The statement is crafted to make David Crowley look negative in all these lights, and to make the caring, loving neighbors of the Prochnows look like credible, upstanding, elderly grandparents that are just doing the right thing.
Well, and they're the first people to say that this was either a murder or a suicide, and that the dog ate these bodies. So.
But she's not suspicious. She's not suspicious like that.
No, just us people are suspicious like that. Her words. People like us.
How do you jump to murder suicide if you're not you can't say you're not a suspicious person, but your immediate Colin didn't suspect anything suspicious. He thought they were dummies. So Judy, who claims, she quoted herself, she said that on record, I am not a suspicious person. I don't immediately jump to murder. But the first thing she said was, I think there's been a murder or suicide.
Weird.
So that discounts her. How do we know that she's credible? So like Dan said, you add into certain statements little snippets here and there of, oh, they blew the driveway out. Nice, good, upstanding citizens. They must be credible because they had, this relationship with the Crowleys. So we should believe them for that reason. Don't ask questions past that, though.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think, Greg, on a future podcast that we do, we'll cover that 911 call extensively, and the phrases used and the suggestions Judy Prochnow gives on that various 911 call. Because that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. We'll definitely get there. Any final words here? I think we'll wrap this episode up. This is a great place for us to start, and we'll come back and do one about finding those bodies, which will include that 911 call.